Hello guys, welcome back to another Nioh 2 build video. Sorry this one has taken so long. It's become very difficult to simply churn out builds now. This is something content creators are struggling with at the moment, and I know Project had a lot to say about this in his recent videos, and I would agree. It's a little bit difficult to even want to keep making builds when they keep adding to the RNG pool while simultaneously nerfing the ability to obtain the things you want efficiently, which sort of ties into the reason of why I decided to make this build. So the concept here is to make a template build that covers all areas and has the ability to work with any weapon in the game. So it's not going to be the highest damage potential build in the game, but it will offer you an all-round balance of tankiness, spell utility, weapon freedom, and does, as the footage shows, still have good damage potential. You can also tweak the build to maximize any of those areas, which I will explain how to do later in the video. First, we will go over the defensive aspect of the build, and it all begins really from our chosen clan, and that is Todo. This is what I was using at the end of Nioh 1, if you remember the original Immortal Swordsman build. Up until now in Nioh 2, Todo didn't really have much value due to how stat scaling works. With the introduction of Dream of the Wise, we can now reach 200 points in stamina, which translates to around 1000 life increase and also allows us to have much higher equipment weight while staying in B agility. And the heavier our equipment, not only obviously increases our defense and toughness, but also increases our damage with damage bonus equipment weight rank A, which is what you have at max clan rank. So the next step is to have the heaviest armor possible that's capable of wearing a grace and still having a useful affix that synergizes with the concept of the build. So in our case we've chosen Governor's armor, which comes with damage taken at critical reduction, with the exception of the headpiece, which is the Water Buffalo horn helmet that gives us a defense buff on life gained. I did try this with a full set of Veteran's armor and then remodeled all of the armor pieces for equipment weight, which was great, but unfortunately it prevented us from reaching 350 toughness, which is essential to the build, and that is because we are running ultimate stamina with 200 points in stamina for AA toughness. And any weapon we use will be running a transform bonus, changed to stamina if it doesn't already scale with it naturally. You can see we also have ultimate courage, so the combination of these two together allow us to really power through attacks, taking very little key damage and using less key to attack whilst having near maximum key regen, so we can be very aggressive whilst also being very tanky. From here we move on to the damage aspect of the build, which comes from a mix of 6-piece Susanoo for versatility and 7-piece Elemental Grace of your choice for the 20% melee damage and 15% key damage. I've chosen the Owata Grace due to saturation being the highest damage potential elemental ailment. We of course cover our bases from other sources for situations where an enemy is resistant to saturation. We will always be able to instantly apply confusion. Before we move on, this is where I will explain other options depending on how you want to play. As mentioned, the build is designed to work with any weapon provided that you place a transform bonus stamina onto it if it doesn't scale with stamina naturally. Nothing else in the build would need to be changed at all, just that weapon. However, if you only intend to play with a single weapon, you might want to change some things around. For example, if you only play fast weapons and you're very good at damage avoidance, you might want to consider swapping out Owata's Grace for Death Dancer. And if you only intend on playing some of the slower weapons or only using very few skills, something like Spin to Win Hammer, you might want to swap out Susanoo because you're not really going to be benefiting from that versatility. In regards to dual weapon combos, I really love to pair most weapons with fists just because of how fast you can build 7 to 8 stacks of versatility almost instantly with the fists before switching to a high burst damage weapon to take advantage of those stacks. So, you know, something like switching to an Odachi and then Moonlit Snow with max versatility. So the way it's set up here is a basic template that works across the board, but it is easy to swap things out to fit your personal needs, okay? Before we look at the gear stats, I'll go over some of the under the hood stats, but before that, there's one last thing I want to mention on the Todo scaling. So one of the main objectives here is to have the heaviest armor possible whilst maintaining the agility. You'll see my equipment weight here currently is at 40.7, whilst being at exactly 70%. This is achieved through a combination of wearing the heaviest armor, remodeling certain pieces of the armor to be heavier, having max stamina, 33 points in strength, which is as far as I'm willing to go for the sake of weight reduction, but most importantly, having a star roll of max equipment weight on your chest piece. Okay, you absolutely need to have that. As it stands, we have over 8,000 life, over 5,000 defense, 60.8% damage reduction at critical, which is a lot, roughly 90% combined elemental damage reduction when guarding, 22% when not guarding, minus 9% damage taken from yokai, minus 7.5% damage taken mid-attack, a further general reduction stat of minus 6%, and then multiple sources of mitigation coming from passive defense buffs, and we also have huge amounts of life regeneration. Offensively, we of course have our damage scaled of our equipment weight, damage bonus stamina, roughly 204 points in base attack, 32.9% active skill damage, a 30% damage increase when at critical health, 34% melee damage to saturated enemies with a further 20% on top of that from the saturation itself, 10% melee damage to purified enemies, as well as increased damage and key damage to yokai, and huge amounts of anima charge increase for yokai ability combos. So regarding the actual gear stats for the weapons, depending on whether or not the weapon scales naturally with stamina, you're going to need a transform bonus stamina inherited onto it, attack bonus stamina, and imbue water if you're running the Owata Grace. Beyond that, I would recommend active skill key consumption and key damage. Now if you look at the axe here, this particular axe / hammer is called the pulverizing hammer. It scales naturally with stamina, courage, and constitution, which is 3 stats that we invest in, and its main affix is active skill key damage. So this is an example of a perfect weapon that scales perfectly with the build. It doesn't need a transform bonus inherit, and you can just manually tempo on everything else that you need. I went for life drain on low attack on this one for using mad spinner in low stance, and then I usually follow up with lumber chop in high stance. My ranged weapons are not fully optimized, but generally I've got damage bonus agility and all speed increase modifiers. For the headpiece, a star roll of anima charge is what I most want to aim for. Direct anima increase is also a good option. Beyond that, we want active skill damage, attack increase, and then optional rolls of key increase and elemental damage taken when guarding. The latter was of course placed on via an orange inheritable, which can then be rerolled. For the chest piece, an essential star roll of max equipment weight. I also have a life increase star roll, which works out fine. Then you want to take active skill damage, life on Amrita absorption, and attack increase. I'll also mention at this point the reason I'm taking active skill damage as opposed to elemental weapon damage is because, as mentioned, this can serve as a weapon switching build, which means losing manual elemental imbues if switching weapons mid-combo, so active skill damage is the way to go for that playstyle. On the gloves, I'd say try and aim for a star roll of melee attack key consumption reduction. Near 10% key reduction coming from a single stat is of very high value. Then active skill damage, native attack increase, and whatever you want. I've taken elemental damage reduction when guarding and running speed. For the waist, I have a star roll of active skill damage. Ideally this would be active skill key damage, but I took what I was given. The rest are honestly optional. I've gone for key recovery bonus, Amrita gauge, life increase, inherited running speed, which as you know can roll naturally on waist and boots, but I store loads of inheritable running speeds, so finally an orange inheritable of attack increase. So on the legs, this is where I threw both tenacity and faster winded recovery, same again with inherited running speed and an orange inherited attack increase. Okay, now for the accessories, this really drove me crazy. I must have rarity upgraded near 100 accessories to try and get a combination of what I wanted exactly. I had the perfect double star rolls, but then with the wrong grace, and then the right grace with trash rolls. So these both have active skill damage, which is okay, but I'd much rather have a combination of rolls of things like melee damage versus zero key enemy, damage versus saturated or purified. But one of the main reasons I'm using this stupid accessory here, the Kodama accessory, is simply because only certain accessories can roll with damage taken at critical, which as mentioned earlier synergizes with all of the gear we've chosen. As far as I'm aware, the only accessories that can roll this are Kodama, Onimori, Prayer Beads, Medicine Case, and Wise General Pillbox. But for the stats on the Yasukani, I have life recovery on Amrita absorption, elemental damage taken reduction, defense bonus courage, which increases the defense of the accessory itself, then saturation accumulation. And on the Kodama accessory, it can also roll life recovery on Amrita absorption, defense bonus courage, and then the unique attribute of damage taken at critical. If it wasn't for this stupid accessory with 2 useless affixes, I would also have elemental damage reduction on here. For the scroll, the 2 essentials are ultimate stamina and ultimate courage. My favorite optional role is definitely counter yokai tactics, and then I have a placeholder of active skill key consumption, which is about as useful of a placeholder stat as I can get at the moment. For the spirits then, the main spirit I'm using for this build is Ho-Oh. My favourite spirit is still the Fox with the Corruption Beam, however that's only really useful on single weapon elemental imbue playstyles, which this isn't, so Ho-Oh is definitely the best general spirit in terms of easy purity application with the Guardian Spirit Talisman. And then you have 7% damage reduction from Yokai, which obviously synergizes with the defensive aspect of the build, and then of course that 10% melee damage versus purified enemy. Our second spirit is Inner Saseo for the damage taken mid-attack reduction, but if you want to be more offensive, Ho by itself gives 4% high stance attack damage when used as a secondary spirit, which is very good depending on what weapon you're playing. The two important cores are going to be Gazuki and Gyuki. Gyuki for the melee damage versus saturated, but if you've chosen a different elemental grace, you'll be taking a different core here. Gazuki obviously because it's in a league of its own in terms of one-shotting max key bars. And then I have Nupepo at the moment, but this is what I would consider the flexible core category. I switch this around from time to time depending on what I'm doing. Sometimes I like to throw in a small anima cost core here for animation cancelling. Depending on the weapon, I won't want to use Nupepo's ability because the key cost will cause more problems than it's worth, but the native life increase and life recovery on Amrita absorption are fantastic passives to have synergistically with this build. For our Jutsu, we want Guardian Spirit Talisman. This can come from the Omyo itself or the fleeting amulets. We have Extraction Talismans, which is going to trigger all of our X on Amrita absorption rolls, such as life on Amrita absorption, etc. Then we want to pick at least one offensive ninjutsu that's going to depend on what you're fighting. So typically, I'll take Flame Dragon Scroll, which drops from Hayabusa in the new DLC. But if I'm fighting something like Ryomen, who is resistant to water and fire, I'll switch this out for Lightning Feathers. Same with the Water Familiar Talisman I also carry. I'll change this to the Lightning one depending on the situation. I also carry Lantern Plant Fruit to gain Anima before boss encounters. I take Arch Yokai Talisman for Anima charge mid-fight. Quick Change Scrolls are pretty self-explanatory. Carnage Talisman for the big deeps, and then on top of that, Soul Purge Talisman, which also stacks with Carnage. And whilst this is the highest damage buff you can use, do not use this if you're planning on a weapon switch playstyle where you switch weapons mid-fight, because then you're going to lose all of the familiarity on the weapon you had when you cast this buff. Also, do not use this unless you're absolutely sure you can both kill and end the mission before the buff wears off, but generally this spell is the secret to all of the crazy damage you see people do. I then take Protection Talisman and Barrier Talisman for the damage mitigation and super key regen. So I'll show you the level stats now. First we need to make sure that we have all of the stats needed to cover the gear requirements, including the accessories and the Spirit Guardians. We also need to be conscious about what stats would be needed if we wanted to remodel our equipment for the Refine upgrade. That increases our stat requirements, because we can't upgrade everything for equipment weight, because then we're going to go over our weight capacity. So some stuff's going to have to be remodeled with the Refined feature, which is another reason why I have 33 points in strength. Not only is 33 points in strength a soft cap checkpoint for weight capacity increase, it's enough for me to remodel any piece of armor for the Refine upgrade. We of course want 200 points in stamina and then 150 points in constitution. I have 30 points in magic for the soft cap for Omyo capacity, and then 20 points in ninjutsu, which is enough for me to carry the ninjutsu that I need. At this point it comes down to a balance of what's most valuable, and this is also going to depend on what level you are. 95 points in constitution was enough for me to hit 8k HP, which is enough for me. At this point, gaining 2 HP per level is not nearly as valuable as key increase from putting points into heart. So you also have the choice to continue stacking into strength here, but I advise moving into heart at this point. Obviously I'm not max level yet, but I imagine by the time I am, investing in heart from this point on will really give the build a solid, balanced and comfortable feel. There's one last thing that I really want to talk about, and that is my farming process. So if we look at this quest here, Master of the Three Evils, you can see I've completed this quest 567 times. This was done with level sync on and between level 1 and 9 penance increase depending. So during this process I was able to upgrade countless accessories, farm a ton of XP, obtain rarity and grace inheritables. I made something like 200k gold from the amount of tea sets that dropped. I found a ton of Dream of the Wise scrolls, and basically the point I'm getting at here is this was the most complete farm that I have found. Now I'm not suggesting you choose this quest specifically. What I'm suggesting is find a boss, no matter the region level, that you in particular find easy. Certain bosses for me are easier than others depending on what weapon I'm using. For me, I can kill this guy in 10 seconds using fists, even with +9 penance and level sync on. So find that boss for you, make sure level sync is on, get that penance stone on, and then just start smashing it. It's the easiest way to farm absolutely everything at the same time. Obviously there's only one thing that you're not going to be able to farm doing this, and that's the rolls on scrolls themselves, which you of course will need to farm individually. But when you get onto that, I do suggest doing that in online co-op because it's much more fun and a well-deserved break from farming via the method I just showed you. I'll be honest, I'm getting a little bit tired of the grind, especially just to make one simple build. I'm really beginning to question how many more of these builds I can make for you guys, because at the moment I'm simply doing it for the sake of doing it, and there isn't really any practical value in me doing them, simply because of how hard it is to do. You know, it's kind of taking all of my time that I should be using for other things in life, to be honest. If the game can get to a point where it's easier to make builds again and I can upload with more frequency, then that would obviously be more feasible. But as it stands, they really need to address these issues, because let's be real, the game doesn't have the biggest active player base, they don't do a good job of promoting the game to new players, and now they're kind of killing off content creators by making it near impossible to make builds. So fortunately, I did obtain a lot of grace inheritance through my farming process, so I should hopefully be able to make 1 or 2 more builds within this DLC. But I'll really have to look at what I have and see if it's worth farming what I don't. I really wanted to make a Death Dancer build as well as some Omyo focused builds, and I also have a couple of ideas for some really unique mix sets, so fingers crossed I'll be able to come up with something that doesn't take another 3 weeks to farm. That said, if you have any suggestions on things you'd like to see, please feel free to leave them down in the comments, as well as any questions regarding this build if I've left anything out. You're also welcome to join our Discord if you have any questions or are looking for people to team up with in terms of scroll farming and co-op. And if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up, and if you're not already subscribed, consider doing so for hopefully more Nioh 2 content coming soon. Okay guys, until next time, stay safe and take care.